He thought it was just a regular evening, until two officers turned his life upside down. If you believe justice should never depend on skin color, hit that like button and subscribe. The sun had just begun to set over Los Angeles, washing the city in a golden haze. The parking lot outside Gold Line Fitness was half empty, the last few gym-goers trickling out after their evening workouts. Among them was David Harper, a tall, athletic black man in his early 40s, dressed in a gray hoodie and sweatpants, a towel draped over his shoulder. He looked like any other local getting back into shape after work. He walked with an easy stride toward a dark gray Toyota parked near the edge of the lot. As David approached his car, he fished into his pocket for the keys. He gave a soft sigh. He was ready to get home, take a shower, and finally rest after a long day. He pressed the unlock button on the key fob. No sound. He frowned and tried again. Still nothing. Great, he muttered under his breath. He reached for the door handle and gave it a tug. The door didn't budge. Maybe he had hit the wrong button. He pressed again. Still no response. He examined the key fob more closely. Is this the right one? He thought. Maybe he'd grabbed the spare from the wrong key ring. He glanced at the license plate. No, this was definitely his car. Then came the shout. Hands where I can see them. The voice cracked through the air like a gunshot. David jerked around instinctively, startled. Two police officers were rushing toward him from across the lot, their hands on their holstered weapons. One was tall and burly, with mirrored sunglasses and a stone-cold smirk plastered on his face. The other was younger, leaner, clearly still in the early years of service, his expression unreadable but tight with tension. David's heart skipped. He instinctively lifted his hands halfway, confused. Wait, what? You're under arrest, the older cop barked, closing the distance fast. Attempted grand theft auto. David blinked. What? No, this is my car. The officer didn't stop. Without hesitation, he grabbed David's wrist, twisted it behind his back, and began cuffing him. Sure it is, the cop sneered, and I'm the president. Just so happens you were dumb enough to try stealing it in front of two cops. David winced as the cuff bit into his wrist. Officer, seriously, just check the center console. My wallet's inside, license, registration, everything. It's my car. The younger cop stood off to the side, looking uncertain. His name tag read Edwards. His eyes darted from David to the senior officer, but the older cop was already pulling David toward the squad car. I'm sure your fake ID's tucked in there too, he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Then, loud enough for his partner to hear, Can you believe the stones on this guy? Thinks he can lie to our faces. I'm not lying, David said firmly, struggling to keep calm. Just look inside, please. You have the right to remain silent, the older officer snapped. Anything you say or do can and will be used against you in a court of law. I'm telling the truth. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be provided to you. The metal door of the squad car creaked open, and David was pushed into the back seat. He twisted slightly, his face pressing against the cold window as the door slammed shut. From inside, his voice was muffled. Just check the car, please. Outside, Edwards shifted uncomfortably on his feet. Shouldn't we, at least check? Like, maybe his story's legit. The older cop, Sergeant Briggs, his name tag read, turned to him, clearly annoyed. Maybe you should keep your mouth shut and open the damn door for me. You'll get your instincts straight after a few more years. Edwards hesitated, glancing toward the car. Then, reluctantly, he walked around to the driver's side and got in. In the back seat, David sat silently, his breath fogging the glass, hands cuffed in front of him now. His mind raced. This wasn't just a mistake, it was escalating. And fast. He leaned forward. "Officer, Edwards, right? Please, the center console, that's all I'm asking. Just look inside. I left my license and badge in there, I swear to you." Edwards paused. "Badge?" David nodded. "I'm not a thief, I'm a detective. Harper, off duty. I know how this sounds, but I was helping out on a task force across county lines. Look, I get it. Wrong place, wrong timing. But you're making a huge mistake." Edwards glanced toward the front of the car, where Sergeant Briggs had now exited and was speaking on his radio. He could hear the call being made to impound the vehicle. "Don't waste your time," Briggs barked from outside. "He's lying, and you're falling for it." Edwards looked back at David. "You really saying this is your car?" David didn't blink. "Yes, my name is Detective David Harper. Badge 3812, LAPD. I had it in the center console. Just give it a look." Edwards hesitated. Briggs's voice cut through the air again. "You know his kind. All they do is lie and steal." That word, his kind, hung in the air like a noose. Edwards froze. Slowly, his jaw tightened. He turned to Briggs. "His kind?" he repeated, eyes narrowing. Briggs sneered. "Let it go, Edwards. I'm your commanding officer. This is my call." David sat in the back, his lips parted in disbelief. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, not just the accusation, but the ease with which it was delivered, the authority behind it, the coldness. "I'm begging you," he said more quietly now. 10 seconds. That's all it'll take. Just check." But Briggs turned his back and slammed the squad car door, sealing David inside again. The patrol car began to move. David sat stiffly, every muscle in his body burning with restraint. He wasn't going to yell, wasn't going to panic. That's what they expected. Instead, he stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, his voice calm but firm. "Center console," he repeated to himself like a mantra. "Badge, license, right there." At the station, they processed him like any other suspect. Mugshot, fingerprints, paperwork, no phone call, no chance to explain. The officers didn't even look him in the eye. As they escorted him to the holding cell, David turned to Edwards one last time. "You're making a big mistake," he said. "Everything you need is in that car." Briggs smirked, walking away without a word. But Edwards lingered. For the first time since it all began, he looked David in the eye. "If you're really the owner," he said slowly, "where exactly is your ID?" David didn't hesitate. "Center console, black leather wallet, LAPD badge, license." Edwards nodded slowly. "All right, sit tight." David blinked, surprised. "Why are you helping me?" Edwards's voice was quiet. "Because I believe in fairness. Doesn't matter what you look like. If you're telling the truth, you deserve a chance to prove it." And then he turned and walked out of the room. David exhaled, finally, for the first time since it began. Maybe, just maybe, someone was still listening. The fluorescent lights in the precinct buzzed quietly above Officer Edwards as he sat at his desk, his elbows planted on the surface, hands steepled in front of his mouth. The echoes of Sergeant Briggs's voice still rang in his head. "You know his kind." That phrase hadn't just crossed a line, it had bulldozed it. Edwards stared at the computer monitor in front of him, screensaver flickering, untouched. He hadn't filed the arrest report. Not yet. Downstairs in the holding cell, David Harper sat silently on the metal bench. His gray hoodie looked wrinkled, slightly damp with sweat from the gym, now dirtied with dust from the pavement. His hands were cuffed in front of him. His eyes didn't wander. They were fixed forward, calm but weary, waiting. The minutes dragged. Edwards finally stood up. He walked past the sergeant's office, careful not to draw attention, and down the stairwell to the cells. The station was quieter now. Most of the evening shift had left, and the graveyard crew was just beginning to filter in. The heavy security door buzzed as he swiped his access card and stepped through. David looked up. "You came back," he said simply. Edwards hesitated by the bars. "I haven't filled the report yet." David nodded slowly. "That's because you're still not sure." Edwards stepped closer, crouching down near the bars. "Tell me again." "From the top." David leaned forward. "My name is Detective David Harper. Badge 3812. I've been working with a multi-agency task force on auto theft operations across county lines. That Toyota outside, it's mine. I had a late gym session, was on my way home when the lock stuck. The wallet, license, and badge were in the center console. I didn't want to bring them into the gym." Edwards stared at him. "Why didn't you identify yourself immediately?" "I tried," David said, "but your sergeant was already halfway to a conviction. He didn't care what I had to say." Edwards ran a hand over his jaw. "And you're positive everything's in the console?" "Absolutely." The young officer stood, his eyes still on David. "All right. I'm going to check, but if you're lying, if there's nothing there—" "I'm not," David interrupted. "You'll see." Edwards turned and left, his footsteps echoing up the corridor. He took the back exit out to the side lot and reached for his phone. The screen was slightly cracked. He hadn't gotten around to replacing it. He scrolled through his contacts until he reached the one labeled R. Ramirez. It rang twice. "Ramirez?" "Hey," Edwards said, "I need your help. Off the record." There was a pause. "What's going on?" "I need access to a car in Impound. Tonight. Can you meet me there?" Ramirez hesitated. "Does this have anything to do with your sergeant?" "I'll explain when we meet." "All right. Give me 15. Edwards hung up and slipped the phone back in his pocket. He didn't hesitate. He couldn't. Not now. He drove in silence through the city streets, his squad car blending into the night. The impound lot sat on the edge of an industrial park, just rows of chain-link fences and floodlights. He arrived first and waited in the shadows, arms crossed, the quiet thump of his heartbeat louder than the ambient city noise. Ramirez's car pulled up a few minutes later. The detective, a Latino man in his late 40s with tired eyes and a sharp mind, stepped out and locked his car with a chirp. "All right," he said, looking around. "What's the situation?" "It's simple," Edwards said. "I arrested a guy tonight. Claimed the car he was opening was his. My sergeant booked him before checking anything. The guy swore his ID and badge were in the console. But Briggs never let me look." "And now you want to?" Edwards nodded. "Yeah." Ramirez studied him for a second, then pulled out a small toolkit from the trunk of his car. "All right, let's see what we've got." The two of them approached the Toyota, and Ramirez popped the lock using a thin metal strip and practiced hands. The door clicked open. Edwards slid into the driver's seat and immediately opened the center console. Nothing. He blinked, checked again. Still nothing. The glove compartment, empty. Under the seat, dust and a crumpled receipt from a smoothie bar. Edwards sat frozen. His hands rested on his thighs. The pit in his stomach twisted. Ramirez stepped up beside him. "You sure this is the right car?" Edwards nodded slowly. "Yes, this is it. Same plates, same make and model. It doesn't make sense." He stepped out, running a hand over his head in frustration. And then came the voice. Low, mocking. "Well, well, well, look what we have here." Edwards turned. Sergeant Briggs stood just beyond the floodlights, arms crossed, expression smug. "You have any idea how bad this looks?" he said. "Going behind my back, dragging in a detective to break into an impounded car." Edwards tried to stay calm. "I had to be sure. That man's freedom was on the line." Briggs took a step forward. "You're lucky if it's only your badge that's on the line after this." He leaned in. "I told you he was lying. You didn't listen." Edwards looked back at the empty console and shook his head. "No ID, no wallet. You were right," he said flatly. Briggs clapped him on the shoulder. "Of course I was." "Let's go," he added, his tone colder, "before I really lose my temper." The ride back to the station was silent. Edwards stared out the window, but his mind wasn't still. Something felt off. He couldn't shake the unease. The man he'd spoken to in that holding cell didn't seem like a liar. He wasn't agitated, he wasn't playing a role, and more than anything, he had looked him straight in the eye. Back inside, Edwards went straight down to the cells. The hallway was even quieter now, the only sound the hum of old ventilation fans. David looked up as he approached. "You found my license?" Edwards didn't answer at first. He walked up to the bars and stood still. "I searched the whole car," he finally said. "There was nothing there." David's expression didn't change immediately, but something dimmed behind his eyes. That doesn't make sense," he said. "I put it there. I remember, before I went into the gym." "I can't believe I fell for this," Edwards muttered. "I stuck my neck out. I lied to my superior. I'm probably going to get suspended. And for what?" "I'm not lying," David said firmly. "Something's not right. Maybe someone—" Edwards cut him off. "You think my sergeant planted this whole thing just to frame you? That he took your badge and hid it?" "I think someone didn't want you to find it," David said. "I can't prove it, but I know what I did, and I know what's true." Edwards stepped back, shaking his head. "I trusted you," he said, his voice quiet, "and I was wrong." He turned and walked away, but something still gnawed at his conscience. The pieces didn't fit. The man behind those bars wasn't a con artist, and Edwards had learned something dangerous tonight. Doubt, once planted, doesn't fade easily. The next morning, the station hummed with a low, routine buzz. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, officers exchanging reports over stale coffee. But for Officer Edwards, every sound felt distant. He sat at his desk, the same one he had occupied for over 2 years, but now it felt alien, cold, like something inside him had been cracked and hollowed out. He hadn't slept much. After leaving David in the holding cell the night before, he'd gone home, turned off the lights, and stared at the ceiling for hours. The image of David's eyes, calm, insistent, honest, wouldn't leave his mind. It didn't match the narrative Sergeant Briggs had been pushing so confidently. No ID, no badge, nothing there. And yet, something still didn't sit right. He opened his locker and glanced at his reflection in the small mirror mounted on the inside door. His uniform was pressed, his name tag polished, but the man wearing it looked like he no longer believed what the badge represented. He shut the locker with a soft thud. Meanwhile, in the break room, Briggs stood by the coffee machine like he owned the place. He poured himself a cup, smirking as he added 3 sugars. He greeted passing officers with a slap on the shoulder, making light conversation about the genius he arrested last night. Edwards entered silently. Briggs caught his eye and raised his cup in mock salute. "Sleep well, truth seeker?" Edwards didn't respond. He crossed the room, reached for the coffee pot and began to pour, his hand steady, too steady. Briggs sipped and leaned against the counter. "You know, you got lucky," he said casually. "I should have written you up for that little stunt. Calling in Ramirez, breaking into impound. You really want to end your career over a thug lying through his teeth?" Edwards's voice was quiet but firm. "He said his name was Detective Harper, LAPD. Briggs chuckled. "Right, and I'm the chief of staff." Edwards stared at him. What if he was telling the truth? Briggs took another sip. Then he would have had an ID, but he didn't. Case closed. "You're not even curious how the ID just wasn't there." Briggs's eyes narrowed. "You want to keep digging? You go right ahead. Just know this. If you go behind my back again, I'll make your life in this department a living hell." The room went silent. Several officers nearby stiffened. Edwards didn't flinch. "Understood," he said. He left his coffee untouched. By noon, Edwards sat in his car outside the impound lot once again, this time alone. He hadn't asked permission. He hadn't brought backup. He didn't even tell Ramirez. He was done waiting for approval. He stepped out, flashed his badge at the gate clerk, who barely looked up, and walked through the lot until he found the Toyota. Same license plate, same make, same model, same mystery. He opened the door, got into the driver's seat, and stared for a long moment at the center console. Then, carefully, he opened it again. Still empty. He checked the glove box, under the seats, behind the sun visor. Nothing. No ID, no wallet, not even a receipt. It was a shell. His heart pounded. This still doesn't add up. He stepped out of the car and circled to the passenger side. This time he got on his knees and checked beneath the seat. Something caught his eye, a sliver of dark leather barely visible between the seat rails. He reached for it, fingers stretching, and pulled it free. It was a wallet. Sweat prickled the back of his neck. He opened it slowly. Inside was a license and a badge. David Harper, Detective, LAPD. The realization hit him like a punch. Someone had hidden it. Not lost, not misplaced. Hidden where no one would find it with a casual check. Briggs. Edwards stood in silence, the badge in his hand. He felt sick. He had doubted a man who had told the truth from the beginning. He had trusted a commanding officer who had lied, boldly, cruelly, and deliberately. He pulled out his phone and took photos of the wallet, the ID, the badge, and its hidden position under the seat. Then he opened a voice memo app and recorded a statement describing how and where he found it. He wasn't going to be silent anymore. That evening, back at the station, Edwards walked toward the chief's office with the wallet in his pocket. But as he neared the door, it opened, and the chief stepped out with a group of officers behind him. The mood was tense. "Edwards," the chief said, "we need you in the squad room." Edwards followed, his heart pounding. David was still in the cell. He had to be. But the moment he entered the room, he froze. David Harper was standing at the front, no longer in a hoodie and sweatpants, but in a full LAPD detective suit. Badge clipped to his belt, arms crossed, calm, observing the room like he'd done it 100 times before. The room fell silent. The chief cleared his throat. "Before we begin today's meeting, I want to address something important. We've received a number of complaints in recent months, allegations of racial profiling. So we set up a controlled integrity test. With the help of Detective Harper, we arranged for a scenario in which one of our own might be profiled." Several heads turned. Briggs, standing near the back of the room, paled. The chief continued. Detective Harper volunteered to act as an off-duty citizen locked out of his own vehicle. The car was equipped with hidden cameras and GPS tracking. Everything that happened from that moment was recorded. Gasps. Briggs took a step back. The chief pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. Footage began to play on the monitor behind him. Audio and video from the squad car, the body cams, and finally, inside the Toyota. One frame showed Briggs reaching into the center console, pulling out the wallet and badge, and stuffing them under the passenger seat. It was undeniable. Briggs looked like he had been hit by a truck. He stammered. "That's taken out of context." "You can explain it to the judge," Harper said, stepping forward and pulling out cuffs. "Sergeant Briggs, you are under arrest for tampering with evidence and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." The room watched in stunned silence as Briggs was cuffed by the very man he had tried to frame. Justice had arrived, but Edwards wasn't looking at Briggs. He was looking at Harper, and Harper looked back and nodded. Not in anger, but in understanding. Morning rolled in with an unusual tension thick in the air. The briefing room at the precinct was more crowded than usual. Officers filled every seat, some leaning against walls, others clutching coffee mugs like lifelines. Whispers floated back and forth. Something big was coming, though no one could say exactly what. Even the veterans were unusually quiet. Officer Edwards sat near the back, stiff in his chair. He had barely slept again, but this time for a different reason. He kept thinking about the weight of that wallet in his hands, the clarity of the evidence, and the heavy truth behind it all. He hadn't just made a mistake following orders. He'd come within inches of letting an innocent man be destroyed by a system that was supposed to protect him. When the door at the front of the room opened, the noise vanished instantly. Police Chief Raymond Pierce stepped inside, his presence commanding silence. He was a tall, sharp-featured man in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and a reputation for integrity that even the most cynical officers respected. He carried a tablet under one arm and glanced slowly around the room before speaking. "Good morning," he said, voice steady. "Before we get into today's agenda, I want to address an incident that occurred yesterday." He paused. Eyes scanned the room. Nobody moved. "Sergeant Briggs," he called out, motioning toward the middle rows. Briggs stood, smug and confident, as if being publicly recognized was a reward. He adjusted his belt and strode to the front, flashing his signature grin at a few of the officers who nodded at him. "Yes, sir," he said, standing at attention. The chief looked him over. "Tell us about the arrest you made yesterday." Briggs grinned wider. "Caught a would-be car thief in the act, sir. Guy was trying to break into a Toyota in the Gold Line Fitness parking lot. I intervened with Officer Edwards, had him processed and booked within the hour." "Good," the chief replied with a nod. "That makes this next part much easier." There was a beat of silence. Then the chief turned his gaze toward the back. "Officer Edwards," he said. "Front and center." Every head in the room swiveled. Edwards stiffened, rose slowly, and made his way forward. He could feel eyes on him, some curious, others uncertain. As he reached the front, he stood beside Briggs, who gave him a faint, mocking smirk. The chief looked directly at him. "Is it true that you disobeyed a direct order from your commanding officer and independently accessed the vehicle belonging to the suspect?" Edwards drew in a breath. "Yes, sir, I did. I take full responsibility." "And why did you do that?" "I believed the man deserved a fair chance to prove he was telling the truth." The room was still. "Interesting," Chief Pierce said. He tapped his tablet and began pacing slowly. "Because I'm glad you did." Murmurs rippled through the room. Briggs's smile faltered. The chief continued, his voice steady. Several weeks ago, we began receiving credible reports, allegations of racial profiling and improper conduct within our department. I wanted to believe they were isolated, but I couldn't ignore them. So, I devised a test. He turned toward the doors at the back of the room, and, with the help of a trusted officer, we executed it yesterday. The door opened, and in walked David Harper. He was a different man than the one officers had seen in handcuffs. He wore a crisp navy blue suit, shoes shined, his LAPD detective badge clipped to his belt. His walk was controlled, proud, and deliberate. He stood beside the chief with complete calm. "This is Detective Harper," the chief said. He volunteered to assist in our operation by posing as a man locked out of his own car. The vehicle used was one of our own decoys, outfitted with hidden cameras and tracking devices. The room fell into stunned silence. Edwards stood frozen, jaw tight. Across the room, some officers looked at one another in disbelief. "Wait, what?" someone whispered near the back. The chief tapped the tablet again, and a video began playing on the monitor behind them. The footage was clear. Inside the squad car, Briggs roughly arresting Harper, ignoring his explanations. Body cam audio confirmed the mocking remarks, the refusal to check the car, the sarcastic tone. Then came the key moment. The footage switched to a hidden camera inside the Toyota. It showed Briggs entering the vehicle before the impound tow arrived. He glanced around, then reached into the center console, found the wallet and badge, and shoved them under the passenger seat, out of sight. Clear as day. Gasps filled the room. Briggs stumbled back, his mouth opening and closing. I can explain." "You can explain it to Internal Affairs," the chief said sharply. Harper stepped forward, expression unreadable. "Sergeant Briggs," he said calmly, "you are under arrest for tampering with evidence and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." He took out his own cuffs and moved toward Briggs, who backed up a step. "This is a setup," Briggs barked. "This is political. I've served this department for 20 years. "And you just threw that away," Harper replied coldly. He turned Briggs around and cuffed him, clicking the metal tight around the wrists. "You'll be booked and processed like everyone else." Briggs's eyes darted to Edwards. This is your fault." But Edwards didn't respond. He kept his eyes forward, unmoved. Two officers stepped forward and escorted Briggs out. The doors closed behind them. The chief turned back to the room. "We owe Detective Harper an apology, and more than that, we owe our community better. This department will no longer tolerate racial bias, abuse of power, or officers who think their badge makes them untouchable." He looked to Edwards. "And as for you, Officer Edwards, you showed something most don't at your level. You questioned authority, risked your job, and chose justice over blind loyalty." He paused. "There's a vacancy in our sergeant ranks." The room held its breath. "What do you say?" Edwards blinked. His voice was quiet, but steady. "I'd be honored, sir." The room erupted into applause. Not everyone clapped, but enough did to drown out the silence. Harper looked at him and, for the first time, smiled. They shook hands, two men who had stood on opposite sides of a cell door less than 24 hours earlier. Now, standing shoulder to shoulder, they represented something stronger than rank or protocol. They represented what the badge was supposed to mean. The precinct felt different the next day. The air wasn't lighter, not yet, but it was undeniably changed. As Officer Edwards, now Sergeant Edwards, stepped through the front doors in his new uniform with the extra stripe stitched on his shoulder, He felt the shift, not just in how others looked at him, but in how he saw himself. It wasn't pride he felt. It was weight, responsibility. He passed by a few officers on the way in. Some offered nods, others avoided his gaze. He could feel it in the tension of the hallway conversations, the clipped tones, the awkward silences. To some, he was the man who exposed one of their own. To others, he was the man who reminded them why the badge ever mattered in the first place. And to a few, he was simply the one who did the right thing when it counted. He could live with that. As he entered the briefing room, all conversation died down. Chief Pierce stood near the front, already waiting. "Sergeant Edwards," the chief said with a firm nod. "Glad you're early." "Yes, sir," Edwards replied. The chief motioned for him to follow. "Come with me. There's someone I'd like you to meet." They walked side by side down a corridor toward the internal affairs wing. The chief opened a private meeting room, and there sat David Harper, still in his detective suit, a man who now carried a quiet recognition in the building. He stood when they entered. The two men looked at each other for a long moment. "Detective," Edwards said. "Sergeant," Harper returned with a small nod. There was no need to rehash everything. What needed to be said had already been said through action. The chief leaned against the doorframe. "Gentlemen, you've both played pivotal roles in restoring a measure of integrity to this department. And David, thank you again for volunteering to be part of the test. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without risk." "I didn't do it for thanks," Harper replied. "I did it because it had to be done." Edwards spoke up. "And you trusted us to make the right call." "I trusted someone would," Harper said, locking eyes with him. "And you did." A long silence passed. Then the chief added, "Briggs was processed late last night. He's already retained an attorney, but with the video evidence, I doubt he'll walk away clean. He'll face charges and likely prison." He turned to Edwards. "But this isn't over. You've started something whether you meant to or not. Officers are talking. Some are asking questions they haven't dared to before. That makes you a target to some and a leader to others." Edwards didn't answer right away. He understood what the chief wasn't saying. The path ahead wouldn't be easier. In fact, it might be harder than anything before. But he also knew this: he'd rather carry the weight of justice than the guilt of silence. "Understood, sir." The chief nodded once more. "Dismissed." Edwards and Harper stepped out into the hallway, walking side by side now. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Harper said, "You know, when I was sitting in that cell, I kept telling myself just one person. That's all it takes. One person willing to go against the current. I didn't know if you'd be that person." "I almost wasn't," Edwards said quietly. I hesitated. "But you didn't walk away," Harper said. "That's what matters." They reached the main floor. Several officers turned to watch them pass. Edwards could see the unease in some faces, respect in others, suspicion in a few. The truth had landed like a shockwave, and the department was still trying to absorb it. Harper stopped at the front doors. "I've got to head back to my own precinct. They'll be waiting for a full report." Edwards nodded. "And I've got a desk full of officers who aren't sure whether to salute me or avoid me." Harper cracked a small smile. "Let them do both, but lead anyway." They shook hands. As Harper stepped outside into the sunlight, Edwards stood for a moment, watching. Then he turned and made his way back into the squad room, stepping behind the podium at the front for the first time as a sergeant. He looked out across the room. Faces he had known for years stared back at him, some neutral, some curious, a few even defiant. He cleared his throat. "I'm not here to lecture," he said, "but I'll say this. The badge we wear doesn't make us right. What we do while wearing it, that's what matters. The room was silent. And if you ever find yourself caught between an order and your conscience, I hope you choose the badge that lives inside you, not the one pinned on your chest. No applause followed. No cheers. Just silence. And in that silence, something shifted. Later that day, Edwards returned to the evidence room and asked to review the footage again, alone. He watched the moment Briggs reached into the console and palmed the wallet. He watched the smirk, the casual way he closed the door like nothing had happened. He paused the video, not to study Briggs, but to study himself. There he was, on the screen, standing just a few feet away, watching, hesitating, saying nothing. He let the moment hang there. Then he closed the laptop and stood up. He knew now. Courage isn't about not hesitating. It's about what you do next. Underscore, 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 underscore. That evening, Edwards sat in his car in the parking lot outside the station, the city lights glowing behind him. The same spot where it all started, where a man in a hoodie was mistaken for a thief. He looked toward the sidewalk. There was no one there now, but in his mind, he could still hear it. Hands where I can see them. That voice, that moment, that choice, and the one man who wouldn't stay silent. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive with lights and sirens. Sometimes it walks quietly in the form of a question. What if he's telling the truth? And that question, asked at the right time, can change everything. One decision changed everything. If you believe courage means doing what's right, no matter the cost, like the video and subscribe for more powerful stories.